They sent 20 armed security contractors to remove him from the building. He asked them calmly to stand down. They didn't. What happened next left every executive in that boardroom completely silent, not because of the violence, but because of the extraordinary restraint. Every guard was on the floor, restrained, not one of them seriously hurt. And the man responsible straightened his jacket, turned to the 30-year-old CEO, staring at him with her mouth open, and said 7 words that changed everything. The person you trust most just tried to kill you. If you've never heard a story like this one, stick around, because this is only the beginning. Hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss a single episode of what's coming. Like this video if you're already hooked, and drop a comment below telling me your city and country. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now settle in. This one's going to take everything you think you know about loyalty, power, and the quiet men the world always underestimates, and burn it to the ground. The morning Cole Harrington drove into downtown Chicago, he was running 12 minutes late, and his daughter had strawberry jam on his sleeve. He'd noticed it at the 3rd red light, a pale pink smear just above his left cuff, the kind of thing that doesn't come out cleanly no matter how hard you blot it with a gas station napkin. He'd tried anyway. Now the sleeve was slightly damp and still stained, and he smelled faintly of artificial fruit, which was not how he'd planned to walk into Sterling Global's headquarters on what was possibly the most important morning of the past 4 years. He pulled into a parking garage 2 blocks from the tower and sat for a moment with the engine running. The building through the windshield was the kind of architectural statement that costs more to design than most people earn in a lifetime. 62 floors of glass and reinforced steel, the Sterling name rendered in brushed platinum letters above the main entrance, visible from 3 blocks in every direction. Cole looked at it the way he looked at most things, quietly, without expression. He reached into the back seat and retrieved the envelope. It was sealed with a wax stamp he recognized, a small, precise emblem that a man named Raymond Sterling had pressed into the wax himself, with a ring he'd worn on his right hand for 30 years. Cole had watched him do it in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and recycled air 8 months ago. Raymond had handed it to him with both hands and said, with the deliberateness of a man measuring every word he had left, "She's going to think you're nobody. Let her. Just get inside the room." Cole tucked the envelope into the inner breast pocket of his jacket. He got out of the car. Tuts. The lobby of Sterling Global was exactly what you'd expect from a company worth $11 billion. Marble floors, security desks staffed by men in tailored uniforms, a reception area designed to communicate, without saying a word, that your time was less valuable than the time of the people who worked here. Cole stood at the front desk and gave his name to a young woman who typed it into her terminal, frowned, typed it again, and then looked up at him with the particular expression people use when they're trying to be polite about the fact that your name doesn't appear anywhere in their system. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrington. I'm not finding an appointment for you." "There wouldn't be one," he said. "I need to speak with someone in executive security. You can tell them I have a Class 7 federal credential and a sealed communication from Raymond Sterling." The woman's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Raymond Sterling had been dead for 8 months. His name in this building still carried a specific kind of weight, the weight of the man who had built everything around her. "One moment," she said carefully. Cole stepped back from the desk and waited. He checked his watch. Vanessa Sterling's board meeting was scheduled to begin in 43 minutes. The agenda, which he had obtained through channels he wasn't going to explain to anyone in this lobby, included a final vote on what the financial press was calling the deal of the decade, a $7.3 billion transfer of Sterling Global's entire advanced defense division to a consortium of private buyers operating under the name Crestfield Acquisitions. Cole had spent 6 weeks learning everything there was to know about Crestfield Acquisitions. Most of it didn't exist. Vanessa Sterling was on her 3rd cup of coffee and her 2nd revision of the opening remarks she'd deliver to the board in 38 minutes when her assistant knocked. "There's a man in the lobby," her assistant said from the doorway. "He's asking for executive security. He says he has a federal credential and something from your father." Vanessa didn't look up immediately. She finished the sentence she was reading, set the papers down with the precision of someone who keeps her desk very organized, and then looked at her assistant. What kind of credential? Class 7. That's what he said. She was quiet for a moment. Class 7 was a federal classification she recognized. Her father had explained it to her once, years ago, in the way he occasionally explained things that existed at the edge of what he could legally discuss. It was the kind of credential that didn't come from a standard government agency. It came from a specific category of people who had done a specific category of work that most Americans would never be told about. What does he look like? Her assistant seemed briefly uncertain how to answer that. Ordinary, she finally said. Like someone's dad. Vanessa picked up her papers again. Send him to the 48th floor. Have Adrian meet him there. Bob. Adrian Mercer was 54 years old and had been Raymond Sterling's most trusted senior advisor for 11 years. He was the kind of man who wore his authority the way other men wear expensive watches. Not loudly, but in a way that made sure you noticed. He had silver at his temples and a handshake that communicated, without ambiguity, that he believed himself to be the most important person in whatever room he occupied. He was waiting when Cole stepped off the elevator on 48. He looked Cole over. The modest blazer, the slightly damp sleeve, the unremarkable face, and his expression arranged itself into something that was technically courteous and fundamentally dismissive. Mr. Harrington, he extended his hand. I'm Adrian Mercer, Senior Executive Advisor to Sterling Global. I understand you have something from Raymond. I have something for Vanessa Sterling, Cole said. I'd like to deliver it personally. Adrian's smile didn't waver. Ms. Sterling is preparing for a significant board meeting this morning. I'm sure you understand her time is extremely limited. Whatever you've brought, I'm happy to. With respect, Cole said, I was asked specifically to put it in her hands. Something moved behind Adrian's eyes. It was brief. A flicker of calculation dressed up as mild irritation. I see, he said. Well, let's at least get you into a proper meeting room. We can contact Ms. Sterling's office from there and see what can be arranged. Olds. Vanessa came down 20 minutes before the board meeting was supposed to start, which was not something she typically did. She told herself it was because a Class 7 credential was unusual enough to warrant her personal attention. She didn't examine whether there was another reason. The meeting room on 48 had a long glass table and a view of the city that would have been impressive on any other morning. Cole was standing near the window when she walked in, not looking at the view. He turned when the door opened. She studied him the way she studied everything, quickly and thoroughly. Mid-30s, clean-shaved. Nothing about him suggested the word dangerous. Nothing about him particularly suggested anything. He looked, as her assistant had said, like someone's father. The kind of man you'd see at a school pickup or buying coffee at a drive-thru, entirely unremarkable except for the particular quality of stillness he had, the way he stood in the room as if no part of it made him uncomfortable, which was somehow more noticeable than if he'd been visibly anxious. Adrian was already positioned at the corner of the table, near enough to hear everything. Mr. Harrington, Vanessa said. She didn't sit down. I'm Vanessa Sterling. You said you have something from my father. Yes. He reached into his jacket and produced two things, the sealed envelope and a slim badge in a matte black case that he set flat on the table. The envelope is for you. The credential is so you understand why you should read it before your board meeting begins. She glanced at the badge without touching it, then at him. How did you know my father? Through work I can't describe in detail. He contacted me 8 months ago before he died. He asked me to deliver that envelope when you were about to close the Crestfield acquisition. The name landed with visible impact. Vanessa's expression didn't change dramatically. She was good at that, but something shifted in her posture. That acquisition is confidential, she said evenly. I know. Adrian stepped forward from his corner. His voice was smooth and controlled, the voice of a man who had spent years in rooms where controlling the conversation was the whole game. Vanessa, I want to flag something. I've had Mr. Harrington's name run through our security database in the time since he arrived. He's a former private contractor with a history of operating in legally ambiguous territory. The credential he's presenting isn't one I can verify through standard channels, which is itself a significant concern. What I can tell you is that we have a $7 billion transaction closing in, he glanced at his watch, 22 minutes, and this individual has shown up unannounced with a sealed document claiming to be from your late father, with no verifiable appointment and no advance notice. He paused and let that sit for exactly the right amount of time before finishing. In my professional assessment, this is a sophisticated attempt to disrupt the transaction. Vanessa looked at Cole. Is that what this is? No, Cole said. That's exactly what someone trying to disrupt a transaction would say, Adrian said. Something tightened at the corner of Cole's mouth that might have been the beginning of a tired expression. I'm asking for 2 hours. Let me show you what I found. If I'm wrong about any of it, you lose 2 hours. If I'm right, you're not, Adrian said, and his voice had shifted now, just slightly. The courtesy still present, but with something firmer underneath it. He turned to Vanessa. I'd recommend we ask Mr. Harrington to leave the building. If he believes he has a legitimate grievance, he's welcome to contact our legal department in writing. Vanessa stood very still for a moment. This was what her father had warned her about. She would understand later. Not the conspiracy itself, but the moment when the person most responsible for it sounds the most reasonable. She made the wrong call. All right, she said. She picked up her phone and dialed building security. Send up the contracted detail to 48. I need someone escorted out of the building. Cole didn't move. He looked at her, and there was nothing in his face that resembled panic or desperation or the theatrical urgency of a man who knew he was running out of time. He just looked at her steadily. You have my credential on the table, he said. Your father's fingerprint is on the seal of that envelope. That's his ring stamp. I watched him press it. He told me you'd know it. I'm sure he did, Adrian said. The door to the meeting room opened and they came in, 20 men in matching black tactical uniforms, contracted private security. The kind of detail that costs serious money and operates with the kind of authority that comes from being hired by people who can afford not to ask questions. They arranged themselves around the room with practiced efficiency, and the lead contractor, a broad-shouldered man with a careful walk, stopped 3 feet from Cole. Sir, we need you to come with us. Cole looked at the contractor. Then he looked at Vanessa, who was standing with her arms crossed, and the controlled expression of a CEO, who has made a decision and intends to maintain it. 2 hours, Cole said. I'm not asking for anything unreasonable. Sir, I heard you, Cole said to the contractor quietly. I want to be clear that I'm not resisting. I'm asking for 2 hours. Adrian moved toward the table and reached for the black badge case. I'll have this retained as potential evidence of... Don't touch that, Cole said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. There was something in the 2 words that reorganized the temperature of the room in a way that was difficult to explain. Not a threat, exactly, but the sound of a man who had said don't in situations where what happened next was not a conversation. Adrian froze for a fraction of a second. Then the lead contractor reached for Cole's jacket. What happened was not what anyone in the room expected, and it happened very fast. Cole's left hand intercepted the contractor's wrist with the kind of mechanical precision that isn't learned in a gym. It's learned in places where getting it wrong doesn't give you a second chance. He redirected the grip, turned the man's momentum against itself, and the contractor went down onto the carpet with a controlled impact that was loud enough to get everyone's attention, but clearly calculated not to cause injury. For half a second, nobody moved. Then all 19 remaining contractors moved at once. What followed lasted approximately 4 minutes and 40 seconds, though it felt longer to the executives lining the walls of the room who had gone very still and very quiet. Cole didn't fight like someone who was angry. He didn't fight like someone performing for an audience. He moved through the room the way water moves around obstacles, efficiently, without wasted motion, adjusting to each engagement with the kind of calm that was somehow more unsettling than fury would have been. He controlled limbs, redirected momentum, used the room's geography. 3 contractors tried to rush him together, and he split the angle on them so cleanly that 2 of them collided into each other. He disarmed 4 men of their sidearms and set the weapons on the conference table without firing a single one of them. When it was finished, every contractor was on the floor, winded and restrained in various configurations, none of them seriously hurt. Cole stood in the center of the room, and his breathing was slightly elevated, nothing more. He straightened the damp sleeve of his jacket. He looked at Vanessa Sterling. She was standing exactly where she'd been standing, and her arms were no longer crossed, and whatever expression she'd walked in with was completely gone. Every senior executive in the room was staring at him with the particular stillness of people who have just recalibrated something fundamental. Adrian Mercer, for the first time that morning, had nothing to say. "I don't want to fight anyone," Cole said. "I never did. I want 2 hours, and I want you to open that envelope." He paused. "The person you trust most in this building just tried to have the evidence seized before you could look at it. That should mean something to you." Vanessa's eyes moved to Adrian, then back to Cole. The sealed envelope was still on the table, her father's ring stamp pressed into the wax, exactly where Cole had said it would be. She took a breath. She picked it up. The envelope wasn't thick. That was the first thing Vanessa noticed. It wasn't the kind of package that suggests a large revelation. It was a standard business envelope, cream-colored, slightly aged at the corners. The kind her father had kept in the top drawer of his desk at home since before she could remember. She'd seen him write letters in the old-fashioned way her entire childhood, and for a moment the weight of that memory sat on her chest with a pressure she wasn't prepared for. She broke the wax seal carefully. Not because she was being delicate, she didn't particularly feel delicate right now, but because some part of her, operating below the level of conscious decision, didn't want to damage it. The room was very quiet. The contractors on the floor were recovering in various stages of embarrassed discomfort, some sitting up, some still flat on their backs, staring at the ceiling, none of them apparently eager to attempt a second round. Adrian had moved to the far side of the table. He was watching Vanessa with an expression she couldn't read clearly, which was unusual. She'd spent years learning to read Adrian Mercer, and she generally believed she was good at it. She unfolded the letter inside. Her father's handwriting. Precise and slightly cramped, the way it always was when he was being careful about every word. She'd received maybe 40 letters from him over the course of her life, actual letters, on actual paper, and she recognized the particular quality of this one immediately. He'd written this the way he wrote things that mattered. She read it twice without looking up. Nobody in the room spoke. When she finally raised her head, she looked at Cole. "He says you were his commanding officer." "No," Cole said. "He was never military. He says I was the commanding officer of the team he hired to protect one of his overseas operations in 2019. A 6-month contract. He says you saved his life." "It was my team." "He says specifically you." Cole said nothing. Vanessa set the letter down flat on the table and pressed her palm against it, a gesture that looked almost involuntary, like she was trying to hold it in place. "He says that if I'm reading this, it means the Crestfield deal is about to close, and that I should not let that happen until I've seen what you have." "That's correct." Adrian's voice came from the far side of the table, measured and precise. "Vanessa, I need to say something." "Give me a minute, Adrian." "This is a forgery. Raymond's signature can be replicated. The wax stamp design is—" "I said, give me a minute." Her voice came out harder than she intended. Adrian closed his mouth. She picked up the badge case Cole had set on the table earlier and opened it. Inside was a card unlike any standard federal ID she'd encountered. Matte black, with a narrow holographic strip and a classification code along the bottom edge that she recognized the format of, even if she'd never seen the specific designation. Class 7 Federal Credential. Her father had explained the classification tiers to her once, on a Sunday afternoon in his study when she was 26 and had just been named to the Sterling board for the first time. "There are people who work for this country in ways that don't have press releases," he'd told her. "Class 7 means they're authorized at a level I'm not allowed to ask about." She looked at Cole. "This is real." It wasn't quite a question. "Yes." "And the evidence you mentioned, what form is it in?" "Encrypted files on a drive I have with me, and a secondary set of documents that are with a federal contact outside the building. I requested a 2-hour window because that's how long it would take to walk you through everything clearly." "You could have called," she said. You could have sent something through our legal channel, or your legal department has been compromised. He said it simply, without drama. Two of the senior attorneys on your corporate transactions team have been in contact with Crestfield's representatives for the past 14 months. If I had filed anything through official channels, you would never have seen it. The room absorbed that. Vanessa picked up her phone. She didn't call her assistant. She called a number she kept in a private contact list that only had 11 entries, the direct line for her head of internal security. It rang twice. Marcus, she said when he picked up, I need you on 48 right now, and I need you to come yourself, not send anyone. Marcus Webb arrived 7 minutes later. He was 51 years old, built like someone who had once been significantly larger and had redistributed the mass over time into something denser and more economical. He'd been Sterling Global's chief of internal security for 3 years, recruited directly by Raymond Sterling from a background that Vanessa knew only in broad strokes: federal work, some kind of special operations history, a career that had clearly involved things he didn't describe at dinner parties. He walked into the meeting room, assessed the contractors still recovering on the floor with the swift efficiency of someone doing a professional calculation rather than expressing surprise, and then his eyes found Cole. He stopped. Something crossed his face that Vanessa hadn't seen on Marcus Webb before, a shift that moved through his expression quickly and settled into something that looked almost like the particular feeling of seeing a person you'd long stopped expecting to see. "Commander?" he said. Cole looked at him for a moment. "It's been a while, Marcus." 4 years. Webb shook his head slowly, not quite in disbelief, but in the way of a man acknowledging that the world occasionally arranges its coincidences without asking permission. "You look the same. You look older." "Thank you." Webb turned to Vanessa. "Ma'am, Cole Harrington was my commanding officer on a classified joint task force operating under federal contract from 2015 to 2021. I will personally vouch for his credential and his integrity." Vanessa looked between the two of them. "You've been working for my company for 3 years, and you didn't know he was connected to my father?" "I didn't know your father had contact with Cole," Webb said. "That wasn't information I had. But if Cole is here saying something is wrong with this transaction, I'd listen to him before I listen to anyone else in this building." He said the last part without looking at Adrian, but it had the particular quality of a statement aimed at someone specific. Adrian was very still on his side of the table. "All right," Vanessa said. She looked at her watch. The board meeting was supposed to have started 9 minutes ago. "Someone call upstairs and tell the board there's a delay. Tell them 90 minutes. Don't give them a reason." She looked at Cole. "You said you needed 2 hours." 90 minutes is enough if we start now." "Then start." Cole pulled a drive from his inside jacket pocket, small, military spec, the kind that needs a specific decryption sequence to open, and set it on the table. Then he looked at Vanessa. "Before I open this," he said, "I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "The Crestfield acquisition. When did you first hear that name?" She thought about it. 14 months ago, Adrian brought it to me as a potential buyer for the defense division. He'd been in preliminary contact with their representatives for, he said, a few weeks at that point. 14 months ago, Cole repeated. Crestfield Acquisitions was registered as a legal entity 15 months ago. The registration address is a mail forwarding service in Delaware. The principals listed on the registration are 3 names that trace back to shell corporations incorporated in the Cayman Islands, one of which was dissolved before Crestfield itself was even registered. Vanessa's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. "The company that approached you about buying your defense division," Cole continued, "doesn't functionally exist. The $7.3 billion in the proposed transaction doesn't originate from operational revenue of any real business. It's been assembled through a layered network of financial instruments and transfers designed to obscure its origin. My federal contact has been tracing the money for 6 weeks. It runs through 4 countries and 9 intermediary accounts before it gets to anything that looks like a legitimate balance." "Meaning what?" Vanessa said. Not a question exactly, the voice of someone who already suspects the shape of the answer. "Meaning that what's being proposed isn't a sale, it's a transfer. Someone inside Sterling Global is planning to move your entire defense division, the patents, the proprietary systems, the classified contracts, to a buyer whose identity is deliberately hidden, using a forged transaction that will look legitimate on paper until it's too far along to reverse. The room was very quiet again. Webb had taken a position near the door, arms crossed, listening with the focused attention of a man who processes information through professional threat assessment before he processes it through any other filter. Adrian said, "This is speculation assembled from—" "I haven't asked for your input," Vanessa said. She said it flat, without heat, which was somehow worse than anger would have been. Adrian closed his mouth. Cole connected the drive to a tablet Webb had brought up from security. The decryption took 40 seconds. Then he turned the screen so Vanessa could see it. What she saw over the next 73 minutes reorganized everything. The first layer was the biometric file. Someone had cloned her authorization signature, not forged it in the crude sense, but actually replicated the biometric markers that Sterling Global's secure systems use to authenticate high-level executive decisions. The company used a layered verification system for transactions above a certain threshold, fingerprint, vocal pattern, and a 6-digit rotating authorization code. All three of Vanessa's had been cloned. The technical work behind it was sophisticated enough that Cole needed Webb to walk her through parts of the explanation, because some of what had been done was at the intersection of hardware and software engineering in ways that required professional context. Whoever did this had inside access to the biometric enrollment database, Webb said, leaning over the screen. You can't spoof these signatures from outside. You need the original data files that were captured when the system was installed. Who has access to those files? Vanessa asked. Webb's jaw moved. 3 people in the company: legal IT director, head of enterprise security, which is me, and the senior executive who authorized the system implementation. He looked at Vanessa. She looked at the table. Then she looked at Adrian. Adrian Mercer had been the senior executive who authorized Sterling Global's biometric security implementation 3 years ago, 8 months before Marcus Webb had been hired. Adrian's expression was doing something complicated. The practiced control of a man who has spent his entire career managing the impression he makes on rooms full of people, now working significantly harder than usual. This is circumstantial, he said. Access to an administrative database doesn't establish the second file, Cole said. The second file was communications, encrypted, routed through a private server that had been set up 16 months ago, 2 months before Crestfield was formally registered, and scrubbed on a rolling 30-day cycle. Except that scrubbing a server doesn't erase its logs from every point it touched on its way to and from other servers. Cole's federal contact had spent 6 weeks pulling thread ends from network nodes across 3 countries, and what they'd assembled was incomplete but specific in the ways that mattered. There were 41 recoverable message fragments, dates, partial text, authentication signatures, enough to establish a pattern of communication between an internal Sterling Global account and an external address that traced back to Crestfield's primary representative. The Sterling Global account had been created using a name that didn't exist in the company's HR system, but the authentication signature on the account, the digital fingerprint embedded in every message sent from it, matched the biometric profile of Adrian Mercer. Vanessa read the recovered fragments. She read them slowly and completely, the way she read everything, and Cole didn't rush her. When she finished, she set the tablet face down on the table. She was quiet for a moment that had a particular quality. Not shock exactly, because some part of her, she would acknowledge later, had been receiving signals she hadn't wanted to interpret for longer than she wanted to admit. The way the Crestfield deal had materialized fully formed, with documentation already prepared. The way Adrian had always had answers for her concerns before she'd finished articulating them. The way he'd moved, this morning, to intercept Cole before Cole could reach her. "There's more," Cole said. "I know there's more." Her voice was steady. "Show me." The third layer was the disposal plan. This was the piece that Cole had held back until he was confident she was prepared to receive it, because it was the piece that was hardest to process. Someone had constructed a contingency, a plan for what happened if the transaction encountered complications. The 20 contracted security guards who had been sent to remove Cole from the building were not actually employed by Sterling Global's standard security vendor. They had been brought in through a third-party contract signed 3 weeks ago using authorization that had been processed through the cloned biometric system. Their brief, documented in a set of instructions recovered from the private server, was not simply to remove Cole if he showed up. It was to ensure that the classified badge and any documents he carried were confiscated and destroyed before they could be reviewed. If that proved impossible, they were authorized to escalate. The word escalate appeared in the instruction document without further specification. Cole had worked in enough operational context to know exactly what that meant. Vanessa stared at that line for a long time. "He brought the guards in," she said. "I called building security and they sent the contracted detail. I thought it was our standard." "The contract was processed 10 days ago," Cole said. "Webb can verify. It replaced your standard detail for this week only, starting yesterday morning." Webb had his phone out. His expression had gone very flat in the way of someone who is controlling a considerable amount of something. "Confirmed," he said quietly, looking at his screen. "The usual contract security is off schedule this week. Temporary replacement authorized through Enterprise Administration." He looked up. "I didn't authorize that." Vanessa stood up. She'd been sitting for the past hour, and the act of standing seemed to clarify something in her posture, like a recalibration. She walked to the window and stood with her back to the room for a moment, looking out at the city. 60 floors below, Chicago moved through its ordinary Monday morning, entirely unaware that in this room, on this floor, 7 years of the life her father had built and handed to her had just been shown to her from the inside out. She'd trusted Adrian Mercer for 6 of those 7 years. He had sat across from her at the table where her father used to sit. He had advised her through the first acquisition she'd led, through the board restructuring after Raymond's diagnosis, through the months after Raymond died when the company needed a steadiness she'd sometimes had to manufacture because she was also grieving and she couldn't do both things perfectly at the same time, whatever anyone expected. She'd trusted him the way you trust someone who is trusted by the person you loved most. She turned around. Adrian was still at the table. He'd been quiet for the last 40 minutes in the way of a man who has understood that speaking is no longer helping him and is now engaged in some other kind of calculation behind his careful eyes. "Adrian," she said. He looked at her. "I want you to stay in this room." Her voice was very controlled. "Marcus is going to stay with you. If you attempt to leave or to contact anyone externally, I will treat that as confirmation of everything I just read. Do you understand?" "Vanessa, what you've been shown is, do you understand what I just said?" A pause. Something in his face moved, reorganized, went still again. "Yes," he said. She picked up her phone and called the federal contact number Cole gave her. While it rang, she looked at Cole. He was standing where he'd been standing for most of the past 90 minutes, near enough to the table to engage, far enough from the door not to seem like he was thinking about leaving. And he was watching her with the same quality of attention he'd had since she'd walked in. Not aggressive, not triumphant, just present in the complete and unhurried way of someone who had decided a long time ago that the only thing worth projecting into a room was accuracy. "You drove here yourself," she said while she waited for the call to connect. "You drove here this morning, alone, with that envelope?" "Yes." "From where?" "Naperville. I live in Naperville." She almost said something and then didn't because the federal line picked up and she needed to focus. But she'd noticed, sometime in the last 90 minutes, the dried strawberry jam on his sleeve. She'd noticed it and then set it aside as irrelevant, the way she set aside anything that didn't serve the immediate situation. Now it resurfaced briefly. This man who had sat across from Raymond Sterling in a hospital room 8 months ago and accepted an envelope and a mission and had then driven 45 minutes into the city with jam on his jacket to deliver it. And the thought moved through her quickly and was gone. She had work to do. While she spoke to the federal contact, Cole walked to the window and looked out at the city below. Behind him, Webb stood near the door with his arms still crossed, watching Adrian Mercer with the professional steadiness of a man who does not need to announce what he's prepared to do. Adrian sat very still. He looked at the table. His hands were flat on the surface in front of him, And for the first time since Cole had walked off that elevator, the most controlled man in the room had the particular quality of someone trying very hard to appear controlled and not entirely succeeding. Somewhere above them, on the 61st floor, 11 board members were waiting in a room that had catering and a view and $7.3 billion on the agenda, growing impatient in the way of people who are accustomed to having their time respected. They were going to wait a little longer. The federal contact's name was Diane Cho, and she had been expecting Vanessa's call. That was the first thing that unsettled Vanessa. Not the evidence, not Adrian sitting 10 feet away with his hands flat on the table, but the way Diane Cho picked up the line and said, "Ms. Sterling, I've been waiting," in the tone of someone who had cleared her schedule for this specific conversation and had been watching the clock. "You know why I'm calling," Vanessa said. "Cole reached out to my office 6 weeks ago with preliminary findings. We've been building the federal side of this in parallel. I want to be transparent with you. We couldn't move until we had confirmation that the transaction was imminent because we needed everything in motion before anyone inside your building had the opportunity to begin the erasure protocol." "The erasure protocol," Vanessa repeated. "The plan to wipe all internal records the moment the board vote concluded. Cole's files show it was designed to execute automatically, triggered by the transaction authorization going through your system. Clean the servers, collapse the shell accounts, leave nothing traceable inside Sterling Global's infrastructure." A brief pause. "Whoever designed this knew your systems well enough to build a self-destruct into the transaction itself." Vanessa looked at the back of Adrian Mercer's head from across the room. "How long do we have?" she asked. "The erasure is triggered by transaction authorization. As long as the board doesn't vote, the clock doesn't start. But if someone inside your building manually initiates it, if whoever is managing the operation decides the situation has changed enough to cut losses, it could begin independently of the vote. Can you stop it if it starts? We have a team at a federal facility monitoring your network in real time. If it initiates, we have a narrow window, 7 to 9 minutes, to execute a counter protocol that freezes your servers before the wipe reaches the core files. After 9 minutes, the classified contracts and the biometric fraud evidence are gone. So we need to keep everything stable." "You need to keep everything stable," Diane Cho confirmed. "And Ms. Sterling, I'd strongly recommend that whoever inside that building is managing the operation doesn't learn how much you know before we have federal agents on site. My team is 90 minutes out." Vanessa ended the call. She turned to face the room and took a breath that she kept very controlled, because this was one of those moments where the thing she needed most was to look like she had more composure than she actually possessed. Cole was watching her from near the window. 90 minutes, she said to him. He nodded. He'd heard the call. "The erasure protocol. Did you know about that?" "I knew it existed. I didn't know the exact trigger mechanism until just now." "So if the board had voted this morning, everything would have been gone inside 9 minutes. The transaction would have processed through a system that no longer contained any evidence of how it was authorized." Vanessa stood with that for a moment. Then she looked at Webb. "I need the building's network isolated. Nobody in or out of the system externally. Can you do that without triggering anything on their end?" Webb pulled out his phone and moved toward the corner. "I can throttle external access gradually. Make it look like a routine security sweep. If I do it slowly enough over the next 20 minutes, it shouldn't register as a lockdown." "Do it." She turned to Adrian. He'd been sitting quietly through her phone call with the particular stillness she now understood differently than she had 2 hours ago. It wasn't patience, it was calculation. He was listening to every word and processing it against some internal model she didn't have access to. "I know you heard that," she said. Adrian looked at her. His expression had reorganized itself into something she hadn't seen before. Not the smooth advisory confidence he'd worn for 6 years, but something stripped down and more honest, in the way that things become honest when there are no more useful alternatives. "Vanessa, don't." She said it quietly. "Whatever you're about to say to me, don't. Not right now." He closed his mouth. She looked at Cole. "You should know," she said, "that I owe you an apology." "You don't," he said. "I sent 20 men to throw you out of the building. You made a reasonable call based on what you knew at the time. Adrian is good at what he does." He glanced at Adrian briefly. "Was good." It wasn't cruel the way he said it. It was just accurate. It is. The first indication that something had changed came at 11:47. Webb's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and the expression that moved across his face was the one that professionals get when they've been anticipating bad news and it has just confirmed its arrival. "Media," he said. "Something's hitting the wire." He turned his screen toward Vanessa. 3 separate news feeds, all posting within 90 seconds of each other, all carrying the same headline with minor variations. "Armed suspect holds Sterling Global CEO hostage, identified as former military contractor." Beneath each headline was a video clip. The clips were approximately 40 seconds each, and they showed Cole, clearly Cole, his face, his jacket, the specific room, in what appeared to be footage from inside the 48th floor meeting room. In the footage, Cole moved through the room with the efficiency and precision she'd witnessed herself, but the angle and the editing removed every moment of context. There was no footage of the contractors grabbing him first. There was no footage of him setting the firearms on the table. There was no footage of him speaking calmly to anyone. What remained was 40 seconds of a man moving through a room full of people dropping to the floor, and it looked exactly like what it was designed to look like. The chyron on one of the feeds read, "Domestic terror threat. Sterling Global on lockdown." Vanessa looked at the screen for 3 seconds. Then she looked at Adrian. "The meeting room has cameras," she said. "They feed to building security." "The room's camera system was patched into the contracted security details feed this morning," Webb said, his voice flat. "Standard protocol when they're on site, which means whoever was managing that detail had access to the footage." He paused, "and the ability to clip it." The edited clips were already running on a financial news channel. 3 minutes had passed since the first posting. Cole's name in a photograph, shown not from this morning, something older, from a period of his life she didn't have context for, were now appearing alongside words like extremist and hostage situation and credentialed operative gone rogue. Cole looked at the feeds on Webb's screen without any visible change in his expression. "They're running the contingency," he said. "Someone made a call, probably in the last 20 minutes, that the situation was deteriorating and they needed to change the narrative before federal agents arrived." "How long before this causes a problem?" Vanessa asked him. "Building management will start getting calls from the media in the next 10 minutes. Chicago PD will receive a report. Probably already have. They'll send a unit to assess. When they arrive at the building and see 20 private security contractors recovering from a physical altercation on the 48th floor," he didn't finish the sentence. "It complicates things," Webb said, significantly. Vanessa was already moving to the door. "I need to make a call to our communications director, and I need to do it right now, and then I need to talk to building management before this gets out in front of us." She paused at the door and looked back at Webb. "Adrian does not leave this room." "Understood. And I mean the room." She looked at Adrian directly. "If you try to contact anyone externally, I will consider it confirmation that you just ordered those media clips distributed." Adrian's jaw tightened. "I didn't order. I'm not interested in your denial right now." She turned back to Webb. "Do not let him near a phone." She left. The next 40 minutes were the most complicated of Vanessa Sterling's professional life, and her professional life had included a hostile takeover attempt, a product liability lawsuit that had gone to federal court, and the experience of taking over an $11 billion company at 28 years old while simultaneously watching her father die of a disease that moved faster than the doctors had predicted. She managed the communications director by phone, gave her specific language that reframed the morning's events without lying, and without revealing anything that needed to stay contained for another 50 minutes. She spoke to building management and to the Chicago PD liaison who called 4 minutes after she expected, and she delivered the specific version of events that was true but incomplete in the ways that protected the federal operation. She authorized Webb to make a controlled announcement to the building's employees that a security assessment was underway and that everyone should remain at their workstations. She did all of this from a secondary conference room 2 doors down from where Adrian was sitting, and she did it with the focused efficiency of someone who has spent 7 years learning to perform under conditions that most people would find paralyzing. But underneath the performance, something else was happening, something quieter and less controlled, in the places she didn't have bandwidth to monitor right now. She'd trusted Adrian Mercer for 6 years. She'd given him access to her father's company, to her own strategic decisions, to the internal architecture of Sterling Global's most sensitive operations. She'd defended him to board members who had occasionally questioned his recommendations. She had, on 3 specific occasions that she could recall clearly now, overruled her own instincts about a situation because Adrian's analysis had contradicted what she was feeling. She didn't know yet what that cost. She would have to find out later. Right now, she had 43 minutes until Diane Cho's federal team arrived. At 12:19, the building's network monitoring system flagged an anomaly. Webb called her on the secure line he'd set up 40 minutes earlier. His voice had the specific quality of controlled urgency. Something's initiating in the technology department. Looks like a stage sequence. It's moving slowly, but the pattern matches what Diane Cho described. Vanessa's stomach dropped. The erasure? Beginning stages. Someone manually triggered it. It's not the transaction. The board hasn't voted. Someone in the building decided to cut losses. How long? If it continues at current rate, core files become unreachable in approximately 22 minutes. Diane Cho's team needs to know now. Vanessa was already calling Diane Cho's number. The federal agent picked up in one ring. "We see it," Diane said. "Our team flagged it 40 seconds ago. We're executing the counter protocol remotely, but I have to be honest with you. Remote execution has a lower success rate than on-site. We need someone physically at the servers in your technology department. If someone can access the primary network hub on your 33rd floor and enter a shutdown sequence, we can hold the files." "What's the sequence?" Diane read it out. It was 14 characters. Vanessa wrote it on her palm with a pen from her jacket pocket because there wasn't time to find paper. "Who triggered the erasure?" Vanessa asked. "Can you tell from the pattern?" A pause. "The initiation signature traces to a terminal in your executive suite. 48th floor." Another pause. "Ms. Sterling, is Adrian Mercer still in the room where you left him?" Vanessa was already walking. She went back to the 48th floor meeting room at a pace that was just short of running, because running in these hallways would create exactly the kind of visible alarm that the building's employees didn't need right now. Cole fell into step beside her when she passed the secondary conference room. He'd been standing in the hallway, apparently in the process of getting coffee from the cart near the elevator bank, and he read the situation on her face without requiring an explanation. "What happened?" he said, matching her pace. "Someone triggered the erasure from a terminal on this floor. Adrian. That's what Diane Cho thinks. Webb has him in the room." "I know." They reached the meeting room. Vanessa pushed the door open. Marcus Webb was standing near the window. His expression said something had gone wrong before she could ask the question. Adrian Mercer was not at the table. The chair where he'd been sitting for the past 2 hours was empty. The table in front of it was clear. The room had 2 exits. The main door through which she'd just entered, and a secondary service door on the east wall that she'd never had cause to use and had consequently never thought to mention. The service door was slightly ajar. Webb turned to face her. The look on his face was not one she'd seen on a man of his specific professional background before. It was the look of someone who had made a mistake he was not going to excuse himself from. "He asked to use the restroom," Webb said. "I should have—" "How long ago?" 6 minutes. Cole was already moving toward the service door. He pushed it open. A narrow corridor behind it, utility access, running parallel to the main hallway toward the elevator bank at the north end of the floor. No cameras in service corridors, standard building design. "He's going for the executive terminal," Cole said. "If he's already initiated the sequence, he'll want to be there to monitor it. Or he has another move we haven't accounted for." "Or he's trying to get out of the building," Vanessa said. "The building's in soft lockdown," Webb said. "He can't exit without a security override, unless he has—" "He cloned my biometric credentials," Vanessa said. "He can exit." 3 seconds of silence with the specific texture of a situation reorganizing itself around a new piece of information. Then Vanessa handed Cole the pen she'd written the shutdown sequence with. 33rd floor. Network hub. It'll be the primary server room. You'll need executive access to get in. She held up her hand with the 14 characters written on her palm. "Take a picture of this." Cole pulled out his phone. She held her hand flat. He photographed it. "I'll find Adrian," she said. Cole looked at her for a moment. It wasn't skepticism. It was the particular look of someone assessing whether the person in front of them has correctly evaluated what they're walking into. He's been planning this for 14 months, Cole said. He's not going to be easy to manage alone. I know Adrian Mercer, she said. I know how he thinks. I know what he wants. The thing he wants most right now is to get out of this building with enough runway to disappear, and the only way he can do that is if those files are gone. If you hold the files, you take that option away from him. He has nowhere to go. Cole held her gaze for another second. Webb goes with you, he said. Webb goes with you to 33. I know this building better than anyone. That's not Cole. She said his name, and something in the directness of it stopped the conversation. Get to the servers. I'll handle Adrian. He held her look a moment longer. Then he moved. The 33rd floor was quiet. It was always quiet. The technology infrastructure department occupied the north half of the floor and operated with the specific low-key purposefulness of people who keep a company running without anyone upstairs thinking very much about how. Cole and Webb moved through the floor quickly, Cole with the shutdown sequence on his phone screen, Webb using his security credentials to clear the access points. The primary server room was behind a biometric door at the end of the main corridor. Webb held his thumb to the reader, and the door opened with the heavy mechanical click of a serious lock. Inside was the controlled cold of professional server infrastructure. Rows of black towers with blinking status lights, the background hum of cooling systems, the particular smell of electronics and regulated air. Cole moved to the primary network hub, identifiable by the cluster of indicator lights that Diane Cho had described. He found the terminal interface and entered the 14-character sequence from his phone. The terminal processed for 4 seconds. Then a status bar appeared. Remote counter protocol sync, awaiting confirmation. He pressed confirm. The status bar changed. File secured. Erasure sequence suspended. Webb exhaled beside him. It was a controlled exhale, the sound of professional relief. Cole's phone buzzed. Diane Cho. He answered. We have it, she said. Files are locked. The erasure sequence is suspended at 11% completion. We lost some periphery administrative data, but the core files are intact. Biometric records, communications, financial transfers, all of it is secured on our end now. A pause. Where's Ms. Sterling? Looking for Mercer, Cole said. A beat. Alone? He was already moving toward the door. Vanessa found Adrian on the 52nd floor. She'd reasoned through it on the elevator. He wouldn't go down, because down was where the building exits were, and he was smart enough to know that Webb had the ground level covered. He wouldn't go to his own office on 48, because that was the first place anyone would look. He'd go up toward the executive levels, where his credentials still worked, and where there were spaces he knew and she'd never have reason to expect. The 52nd floor was Sterling Global's executive communications suite. Broadcast quality video conferencing, direct media uplinks, the kind of infrastructure a company at this level uses for investor presentations and high-stakes announcements. It was where Raymond Sterling had made the announcement of Vanessa's appointment as CEO 4 years ago. She'd stood in front of a camera in this suite and delivered her first statement as the head of this company. Adrian was at the primary communications terminal. He had a headset on and he was speaking into it in a low, rapid voice when she walked through the door. He stopped when he saw her. For a moment, neither of them moved. He looked, she thought, like himself but diminished. The same silver temples, the same bearing that communicated authority, but something in his eyes was different now. Not frightened exactly. More like the look of a man who has played a long game and is now in the process of calculating that the game is over and is not yet reconciled to that fact. He took the headset off slowly. The files are gone, he said. They're not, she said. The erasure is suspended. Federal agents are 11 minutes out. Something moved across his face. He set the headset on the console. Vanessa. His voice was different now. The control was still there, but it was being generated by effort rather than habit, and the effort was visible. I need you to understand that everything I did, don't. She said it the same way she'd said it downstairs, but this time there was something else in it. Not just command, but something more personal and rawer and less controlled. I don't want your explanation right now. I'm not ready to hear your explanation. Then what do you want? She looked at him across the room. She'd spent 6 years sitting at the same conference tables as this man. She'd argued with him about strategy, deferred to his judgment, taken his calls late at night when the company was in crisis. She'd told her father 3 years ago that Adrian was the most valuable person on the executive team. Her father had said, "I hope you're right." She understood now what had been underneath that. "I want to know one thing," she said. "Did you do it for the money?" It was a simpler question than everything she could have asked, and maybe because of that simplicity, he answered it honestly. "It started that way," he said. 7 years ago. There were problems. Financial problems that I won't explain because they're not relevant now. Crestfield approached me through an intermediary, and the terms were— He stopped, started again. "Yes, in the beginning, it was the money. And later?" A long pause. Later, it was too far in to stop. He said it without the particular defense that those words usually carry when people use them as excuses. He said it as fact, which was somehow worse. "I want you to know that I never planned for anyone to be hurt. The instruction document said escalate. That was a contingency. It was never my intention for a contingency you authorized." She could hear her own voice getting harder. "You sent 20 men to take Cole's evidence before I could see it. You authorized an escalation clause against a man who came here to help me. My father asked him to come here. My father trusted him enough to hand him an envelope 8 months before he died while he was sick because he was worried about me and he needed someone reliable. And you sent 20 contractors after him, and then you leaked edited footage to make him look like a terrorist." She stopped. Her voice had gotten louder than she'd intended, and she brought it back down deliberately. "That's what you did." Adrian was quiet. "He has a daughter," she said. "She's, I don't know, 7, 8 years old. He has a child, and this morning his face was on the news next to the word extremist. Because of you." The room was very still. Adrian looked at the floor. Whatever he was doing internally, he wasn't sharing it, and she didn't want him to. She heard the elevator open in the hallway behind her. Cole walked through the door 30 seconds later. He took in the scene. Vanessa standing in the center of the room, Adrian at the console, the headset on the desk between them, with a single comprehensive look. He positioned himself near the door without saying anything. Adrian looked at Cole, then back at Vanessa. "It's over," she said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a dramatic declaration. It was the particular flatness of a statement that has simply become true, and everyone in the room knows it, and there's nothing left to argue about. Adrian nodded once. He sat down on the edge of the console chair, and the movement had the quality of a man who has been standing for a very long time, and his legs have finally registered the fact. They stayed like that. Vanessa standing, Cole near the door, Adrian sitting. Until Diane Cho's federal team arrived 8 minutes later, and the hallways of Sterling Global's 52nd floor became briefly, efficiently busy with people in federal credentials who knew exactly what they were there to do. One of them took Adrian by the arm, gently but without ambiguity, and guided him toward the elevator. He didn't resist. He looked at Vanessa once more as they moved him toward the door, and she held his gaze. And then she looked away first. Not because she couldn't face him, but because she had decided, in the space of that moment, that she was finished looking at Adrian Mercer. Cole came and stood beside her. They watched the federal agents work the room, and the building's ventilation system hummed its ordinary hum, and somewhere far below them the city continued without interruption. "Your daughter," Vanessa said. She kept her eyes on the room. "What's her name?" A beat. "Lily," Cole said. "How old?" 8. 8.5, she'd want me to add. Vanessa almost smiled. It didn't quite make it. "You should call her." "I will," he said. After. There was still the board upstairs. There was still the matter of 11 directors who had been waiting in a room for 2 hours and 20 minutes with no adequate explanation. There was still the question of what Sterling Global did next, and how, and what shape the company was in on the other side of this morning. There was a lot of after. But for now, the files were secured and Adrian Mercer was in federal custody, and the erasure was suspended and the building was beginning, slowly, to breathe again. Cole reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone to call his daughter, and Vanessa turned away to give him the privacy of it, and started thinking about what she was going to say to the board. The elevator ride to the 61st floor took 42 seconds. Vanessa counted them. Not deliberately. It was the kind of thing her mind did when the rest of her was busy managing something. A background process that kept running while the foreground was occupied with the question of what exactly she was going to say to 11 board members who had been sitting in a room for 2 hours and 37 minutes with cold catering and no explanation. She'd spent the 12 minutes between Adrian being walked to the federal vehicles and this elevator ride doing 3 things. She'd spoken again to Diane Cho, who confirmed that the secured files were sufficient for federal prosecution and that a formal asset freeze on the Crestfield transaction would be filed within the hour. She'd called Sterling Global's outside legal counsel, not the internal team, 2 members of which were now also of interest to federal investigators, and given the senior partner a compressed version of the morning's events that took 4 minutes and left the man uncharacteristically silent for several seconds before he recovered and told her he was on his way. And she'd stood in the restroom on 52 for exactly 90 seconds with the water running cold over her wrists, which was something she'd done since she was 19 years old when she needed to reset without anyone seeing her do it. She looked, when she checked the mirror, like someone who had been through a difficult morning. Not destroyed. Not composed in the polished sense. Just a 30-year-old woman who had discovered that the person she trusted most had spent 7 years building a mechanism to take everything her father left her, and who was now going upstairs to do her job anyway. She could work with that. Cole was in the elevator with her. She hadn't asked him to come. He'd simply fallen into step as she walked toward the elevator bank, the same way he'd done outside the secondary conference room 3 hours ago, and she hadn't told him not to. There was something about his presence that she was still processing. Not comforting exactly, because comfort implied a softness the situation didn't have room for. More like having someone nearby who was calibrated to the actual level of the situation rather than performing a reaction to it. "The board is going to ask about the footage," she said to the elevator doors. "I know. The clips that ran on the financial feeds, some of them are going to have seen it before they got the announcement about the delay. Probably. So they're going to walk into that room with a version of this morning that has you as the threat." "That was the plan," Cole said. The deepfakes and the edited clips weren't a last-minute move. They had those ready. If the transaction had gone through before I got into the building, the narrative would have been different. Some kind of post-close security incident, manageable, controllable. When I got through the lobby, they shifted to the version where I was the story instead of the transaction. Vanessa looked at him. "You knew they might do this. When you drove here this morning, you knew they might put your face on the news." He didn't answer immediately, which was its own kind of answer. "You have an 8-year-old daughter," she said. "Yes." "And you drove here anyway." "Your father asked me to," he said. Simply, without the weight some people would put on it. The elevator opened. The 61st floor boardroom at Sterling Global was designed with the specific intention of communicating that the decisions made inside it mattered. Long mahogany table, 14 chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows on the north and east walls that gave a view of Chicago that cost something to look at. The Sterling name was etched in glass on the interior partition wall in the same font as the building's exterior. Raymond Sterling had believed that the physical space of decision-making shaped the quality of the decisions, and he'd spent accordingly. 11 directors looked up when Vanessa walked in. She knew all of them. Some she knew well. Eleanor Fitch, the board's longest-serving member, 71 years old, sharp as anyone in the room, and significantly less patient than her public reputation suggested. David Kwan, who had been on the board since Raymond's second year and who had an institutional knowledge of Sterling Global's history that was occasionally more detailed than Vanessa's own. The others distributed along the spectrum from reliably supportive to reliably skeptical, which was more or less how functional boards were supposed to work. What she saw on their faces when she entered was the specific mixture of concern and controlled irritation that professionals produce when they've been kept waiting without explanation for something significant. A few of them had their phones face down on the table, which meant they'd seen the news coverage and had agreed, collectively or individually, to wait for Vanessa's account before forming a reaction. Eleanor Fitch was not looking at her phone. She was looking at the door, and when Cole walked through it behind Vanessa, her eyes moved to him with the focused assessment of a woman who has spent 5 decades reading rooms. Vanessa went to the head of the table. She didn't sit down. "I'm going to ask you to watch something before I say anything else," she said. "Marcus." Webb, who had come up separately and was standing near the room's AV panel, brought up the display. The screen on the north wall flickered and resolved into the security footage from the 48th floor meeting room. The unedited footage. It began 40 seconds before the version that had run on the financial news feeds, from the moment Cole had entered the room, through his request for 2 hours, through Adrian's interjection, through Vanessa's call to building security. It showed the lead contractor reaching for Cole's jacket. It showed Cole's response, and it showed everything the edited clips had removed. The precision, the restraint, the weapons set on the table, the absence of injury. It showed Cole standing in the aftermath, asking, quietly, for Vanessa to look at an envelope. It ran for 6 minutes and 14 seconds. When it ended, the room was quiet in a specific way. Not the quiet of shock, but the quiet of recalibration. The sound of 11 people adjusting what they thought they knew against what they'd just seen. Eleanor Fitch spoke first. She had a habit of doing that. "Who edited the version that ran on the news feeds?" she said. "The contracted security detail had access to the room's camera system," Vanessa said. "The contract for that detail was processed 10 days ago, using a forged authorization through our biometric system. The standard security detail was replaced specifically for this week." "Who processed the contract?" "The investigation is ongoing. The authorization traces to Adrian Mercer." The name landed differently for different people around the table. David Kwan's expression went very still. 2 of the newer directors exchanged a look. Eleanor Fitch simply continued looking at Vanessa, waiting. "Adrian was arrested by federal agents 40 minutes ago," Vanessa said. "He'll be facing charges that include biometric fraud, corporate espionage, and conspiracy. I'll give you the full account in a moment. First, I want to address the Crestfield transaction." She nodded to Webb again. The screen changed. The evidence files that Cole had shown her 2 hours ago on the 48th floor, now formatted for boardroom presentation. The Shell Corporation structure, the biometric cloning, the communication fragments with Adrian's authentication signature, the financial transfer network running through 4 countries. Diane Cho's federal team had authorized the use of the secured materials for this presentation specifically. She walked them through it in 22 minutes. She was thorough and she was precise, and she did not editorialize. The facts were sufficient. When she finished, the Crestfield transaction was not something that required a vote to reject. It had already been suspended by federal asset freeze. But she wanted the board to understand the full shape of what had been constructed inside their company, because the decisions that came next depended on that understanding. When she finished, she said, "I'll take questions." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then David Kwan leaned forward with his hands flat on the table. "How long has this been building?" he said. "Based on what we've recovered, the account that ran the early communications with Crestfield was created 16 months ago. The groundwork for cloning the biometric system appears to have started before that. Adrian authorized the biometric security implementation 3 years ago. We believe the infrastructure for what happened this morning was built incrementally across a period of years." "Inside our company," Kwan said. "Yes." "Using systems we paid for and trusted him to oversee." "Yes." Another silence. Kwan looked at the table and then looked up at Cole, who was standing near the window in the same kind of quiet position he seemed to find naturally in any room he occupied, present but not asserting his presence. "And this man," Kwan said. "Who are you exactly?" Cole looked at him. "Cole Harrington. I was a contractor for a classified federal task force. I had a prior working relationship with Raymond Sterling. He contacted me 8 months before he died and asked me to investigate concerns he had about the Crestfield acquisition. I spent 6 weeks working with a federal contact to document what I found. This morning, I drove here to deliver what I'd found to Ms. Sterling." "Raymond asked you personally?" "Yes." "He didn't tell the board?" "No." Quan absorbed that. Why not? Cole glanced at Vanessa briefly, then back at Quan. He believed the person running the operation had enough access to the company's information systems to detect a formal internal investigation and respond to it. He needed someone external, someone whose involvement wouldn't appear in Sterling Global's records. Someone disposable, Eleanor Fitch said. Her voice was dry, but not unkind. That's one way to put it, Cole said. What's your way? He thought about it for a second. Someone with no reason to be here except the right one. Eleanor Fitch looked at him for a moment. Then she turned to Vanessa. The media coverage this morning, the footage that ran. We're working with our communications team to put out the accurate version. The unedited footage has already been provided to 3 major outlets. The federal arrest of Adrian Mercer will be announced within the hour. Diane Cho's office is handling the public statement. That will shift the narrative significantly. Significantly isn't completely, Eleanor said. No, Vanessa agreed. It isn't. Eleanor nodded slowly, accepting the honest answer in the way that people who have been in rooms like this for 50 years tend to accept honest answers, with more appreciation than most people would expect. What do you need from us right now? She said. It was the right question, and it came from the right person, and Vanessa felt something in her chest ease by a very small amount at the sound of it. A formal resolution canceling the Crestfield acquisition and directing legal counsel to cooperate fully with the federal investigation, she said, and a vote of confidence in the current leadership. Not because I need validation, because the company's partners, vendors, and counterparties are going to be watching what this board does in the next 4 hours, and a divided signal at this moment creates the kind of instability that the people behind Crestfield may have been counting on even after the transaction failed. Quan looked around the table. Something passed between the directors. Not words, but the kind of professional communication that happens in rooms where people have worked together long enough to have a shared language without needing to speak it. I'll move the resolution, Quan said. Seconded, said Eleanor Fitch. The vote was 11-0. It was after 2 in the afternoon when the formal proceedings concluded and the board members began leaving the 61st floor in ones and twos, phones out, a dozen urgent calls to make, and communications to manage. Vanessa stayed at the head of the table until the last director had gone, and then she sat down for the first time in what felt like a much longer period than the 6 hours it had actually been. The room was quiet. Webb had gone downstairs to coordinate with the federal team. Cole was still near the window. She sat and looked at the table and didn't say anything for a while. Your outside counsel is probably in the lobby by now, Cole said. I know. Diane Cho will need a formal statement from you today. I know that too. A pause. Are you all right? He asked. It was a simple question, and she would have deflected it from almost anyone else in her life. From her assistant, from Webb, from the board members who had looked at her with professional concern during the meeting. She would have said yes and meant I'm functional and moved on. She didn't deflect it from Cole. She wasn't entirely sure why. I'm not sure yet, she said. Ask me in a week. He accepted that without pushing it, which she appreciated. She looked at him from across the room. The damp sleeve of his jacket had dried at some point in the past 6 hours. He looked tired in the way that people look when they've been operating on adrenaline and it's beginning to clear. Not depleted, but settling. Human. What made my father trust you? She asked. Specifically, not the mission in 2019. Before that, after that, what was it? Cole took a moment before answering, and she had the sense he was choosing between several honest answers and settling on the one that was most accurate rather than the one that sounded best. I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that, he said. You'd have to ask him. I can tell you what I noticed about him. He asked better questions than most people I worked for. He was interested in the answer rather than in being right about what the answer was going to be. That's rarer than it sounds, in the kind of work I did. He paused. The last time I saw him, in the hospital, he talked about you for most of the conversation. He was worried you didn't have anyone around you who would tell you things you didn't want to hear. Vanessa was quiet. He was right, she said eventually. About that. Adrian was good at agreeing with you when it mattered and redirecting when it didn't, Cole said. That's a specific skill. Takes time to see it for what it is. 6 years, she said. It took me 6 years. Your father suspected it for 2. He spent the other 4 not wanting to be right. She hadn't known that. She sat with it. Outside the windows, the light over Chicago was doing what Midwestern afternoon light does in late autumn, going flat and pewter gray, the sun too low to clear the buildings on the west side of the loop. She'd looked at this view from this room 100 times, and it looked different now, which was an irrational thing for a window to do, but was happening anyway. The media coverage, she said. The footage they ran this morning. Your name and your photograph. She looked at him. Your daughter might have seen it. Something moved across Cole's face. Quick and controlled, and not entirely controlled. She was at school, he said. She'll come home. I called her earlier, while you were with the board. He stopped. My sister picks her up. I called my sister too. She knows not to let Lily see anything until I can explain it myself. How do you explain it to an 8-year-old? Carefully, he said, and then you answer whatever she asks. He was quiet for a moment. Lily asks a lot of questions, specific ones. She gets that from her mother. It was the first time he'd mentioned a mother, and the way he said it, the past tense that wasn't a past tense but wasn't quite a present tense either, suggested a particular kind of absence that she didn't ask about. She sounds like someone I'd like to meet, Vanessa said. Cole looked at her for a moment. She'd like you, he said. She likes people who don't talk down to her. How do you know I don't talk down to children? You haven't talked down to anyone today, including 20 contractors on the floor. Vanessa looked at him, and something in her face did something that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood of one. It was the first time all day that anything near her face had been in that neighborhood. Her phone buzzed. Outside counsel, in the lobby. She stood up, picked up the folder she'd had with her since the 48th floor, straightened her jacket in the reflexive way of someone who keeps themselves together by keeping themselves together. Cole, she said. He looked at her. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly, even if you think it's not what I want to hear. All right. The security structure at this company, what Adrian built, what he had access to, the gaps he was able to exploit, I need to rebuild all of it. The biometric systems, the authorization protocols, the vendor relationships, the internal oversight. All of it from the ground up, because we can't know what else he touched. She held his gaze. What would it take? Honestly. Cole thought about it for several seconds. Not performing thought, actually thinking, which was one of the things she'd noticed about him, that he didn't reach for answers before he had them. 6 months minimum to audit the full scope of what was compromised, he said. Probably 8 to do it right. You'd need to rebuild the biometric infrastructure from enrollment, every executive credential reissued, every authorization hierarchy reviewed. The vendor contracts that were initiated in the last 3 years need individual review because we don't know what else Crestfield's network might have influenced. Your technology department needs an external audit because the erasure sequence was built inside your own infrastructure. Someone in that department either helped or was compromised without knowing it. And the oversight function? What prevents this from happening again? An independent structure, he said, something that doesn't report through the executive chain, that has access to the security systems but isn't part of the company's own hierarchy, something that can flag suspicious authorization patterns before they become transactions. Like what you described to me downstairs, she said. An independent oversight division. He nodded slowly. Would you build it? She said. He went still for a moment in the specific way of someone who has been asked a question they weren't expecting. I'm not asking you to run it, she said, before he could respond. I'm asking if you'd be willing to consult on building it, the architecture, the protocols, the people. You know what the gaps look like from the outside. That's what I need right now. Cole looked at the table, then out the window, then back at her. My daughter is 8, he said. I know. I've been home for 4 years. I drove here this morning because your father asked me to, and I was always going to do that, but a consulting engagement isn't what I've been planning. I'm not asking you to change your plans, she said. I'm asking you to share knowledge I can't get from anyone else. Whatever terms work for your life in Naperville. He was quiet for a moment. Let me think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking. Her phone buzzed again. She looked at it and then at Cole. I have to go, she said. I know. She walked toward the door and stopped with her hand on the frame. She turned back. The jam, she said. He looked at her. On your sleeve. This morning. Strawberry, I assumed. A pause. Yeah. Lily made her own breakfast? Something shifted in his expression. She's been doing it for a year. She's very proud of it. He paused. She spreads it like she's painting a wall. You should go home, Vanessa said. I will, he said. After. After. There was still the federal statement and the communications rollout and the outside counsel downstairs and 48 hours of work compressed into whatever the next week was going to look like. But the board had voted. The files were secured. The transaction was frozen. Adrian Mercer was in federal custody. The morning was over. Vanessa Sterling went downstairs to do what came next, and Cole Harrington stood for another moment in the empty boardroom looking out at Chicago's flat gray afternoon light, and then he reached into his pocket for his phone to call his daughter. The legal proceedings that followed were not brief, and they were not clean. That was the reality of what came next. Not a swift resolution, but the grinding, unglamorous work of federal investigation and corporate reconstruction that doesn't fit neatly into any narrative. Diane Cho's team spent 11 days conducting forensic analysis of Sterling Global's servers before they released the building's IT infrastructure back to normal operation. The outside legal team filed preliminary injunctions in 3 jurisdictions. The 2 internal attorneys identified as having contact with Crestfield's representatives were placed on administrative leave and later named as cooperating witnesses by federal prosecutors, a development that simplified parts of the case and complicated others in ways that kept the legal team occupied for months. The deepfake footage and the edited security clips were formally retracted by the outlets that had run them within 36 hours of the board meeting. It wasn't fast enough to prevent the story from running, but it was fast enough that the correction caught up to most of the audience before it calcified. Sterling Global's communications team managed the reversal with the kind of disciplined efficiency that Vanessa had spent 4 years building into that department, and it showed. Adrian Mercer did not cooperate initially. That was his attorney's recommendation, and for the first 3 weeks, he followed it. Then the federal prosecutors laid out the extent of what they had. The biometric files, the communication fragments, the financial network, the disposal plan, the instruction document with the word escalate. And Adrian's attorney revised the recommendation. He cooperated after that, thoroughly. The names and structures he provided opened additional threads that kept the investigation expanding for another 4 months. Vanessa didn't attend any of the federal proceedings. She was kept informed by outside counsel, and she read every update. And she filed the information in a part of her mind that she was keeping separate from the day-to-day work of running the company. She wasn't sure when she'd process it fully. She understood in the abstract that it was going to take longer than she'd like. Cole had told her the truth about the rebuilding timeline. 8 months was closer to accurate than 6. She hired him as a consultant 3 weeks after the board meeting, on terms that involved 2 days per week in the office and the flexibility to manage the rest remotely from Naperville. It was not the global security director position she'd intended to offer him, and he would not have accepted that anyway, something she'd understood about him before she finished formulating the offer. He was not a man who wanted a title. He wanted the work to be useful and the hours to be manageable and the drive home to be a distance he could cover before his daughter was in bed. She gave him all 3. What he built over the following months was not elegant in the way that things designed by committee tend to look elegant. It was functional in the way that things designed by someone who understands failure points tend to be functional, specific and redundant and honest about the places where human judgment was irreplaceable and the places where it was the weakest link. He hired 4 people to staff the oversight division, none of them from the company's existing pool, all of them vetted through a process that he designed and that Webb implemented. He wrote the authorization protocols himself, in language that was plain enough that the people enforcing them could understand exactly what they were doing and why. Webb, who had spent 3 weeks after Adrian's arrest in a specific state of professional self-recrimination that Vanessa had watched without entirely knowing how to address, found a new equilibrium in the rebuilt structure. He and Cole had a working relationship that didn't require explanation. They'd had one before, in a different context, and the shape of it transferred without needing to be renegotiated. The work was not dramatic. It was the opposite of the morning that had made it necessary. It was methodical and careful and largely invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it, which was exactly how good security infrastructure is supposed to function. Vanessa was present for more of it than a CEO strictly needed to be, which Cole noticed but didn't comment on. She had her own reasons, and he understood them without requiring her to articulate them, which was one of the things she was still figuring out about him, the quality of attention he gave to things without demanding acknowledgement for the attention. She was still figuring out a number of things about Cole Harrington. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from lack of sleep. Vanessa understood this by the time February arrived, 4 months after the morning that had rearranged everything. In a way she hadn't understood it before. She'd been tired before. She'd worked 100-hour weeks at 26 when she was first learning the company's architecture from the inside, had run on 4 hours of sleep through the hostile takeover attempt 3 years ago, had managed grief and a board and a global operation simultaneously in the months after her father died. She knew what tired felt like. This was different. This was the specific depletion that comes from discovering that a significant portion of what you believe to be solid ground was not ground at all, and that you had been walking on it confidently for years, and that the people watching you walk on it had either not known or had known and not said anything, or had, in at least one case, built the illusion specifically so you would keep walking. She was still functional. That wasn't the issue. She ran the company, and she ran it well, and the board's confidence held, and Sterling Global's stock, which had dropped 11% in the 48 hours following the news coverage of the morning, had recovered, and then some by the end of the first month. The outside world looked at Sterling Global and saw a company that had identified and neutralized an internal conspiracy before it could cause irreversible damage. The outside world was not entirely wrong about that. It was just that the outside world didn't have to live inside the person who had been running the company while the conspiracy was being assembled in the next room. She talked to a therapist starting in December. She didn't announce this to anyone, didn't make it a story, just made the appointment and kept it and made the next one. The therapist was a 58-year-old woman named Dr. Patricia Co., who had an office in Lincoln Park and an uncanny ability to ask the question behind the question Vanessa was actually saying out loud. She didn't tell Vanessa what to feel or when to feel it, which was what Vanessa needed more than she'd known she needed it. She just kept pointing her back toward the things she was looking away from, with the calm persistence of someone who understands that most people don't avoid hard truths because they're weak, but because they're busy, and the hard truths require time to stop and stand still with. She told Dr. Co. about her father. She told her about Adrian. She told her eventually about the morning itself, the 48th floor, the envelope, the board meeting, the 52-floor confrontation, in the specific non-linear order in which it was actually living in her memory, which was not the organized narrative she'd given to Diane Cho or the board or the federal prosecutors. Dr. Co. listened to all of it. She asked, at one point, about the moment Vanessa had made the wrong call, the moment she'd believed Adrian over Cole and ordered the guards to remove him. "What do you tell yourself about that?" Dr. Co. asked. "That I made a reasonable assessment based on incomplete information," Vanessa said. "And do you believe that?" A pause. "Mostly." "What's the part you don't believe?" She thought about it, really thought about it, in the way she was slowly learning to do in this office, without the defense mechanisms she typically deployed when thinking about things she'd gotten wrong. "I think I wanted Adrian to be right," she said, "not because I didn't want to deal with a conspiracy. Because if Cole was telling the truth, it meant I'd missed something for 6 years that my father had seen. And I didn't want that to be true." Dr. Co. wrote something. "What does it mean to you that your father saw it and you didn't? That he protected me from it instead of teaching me to see it myself? Is that his failure or his love?" Vanessa sat with that for a long time. "Both," she said finally. "Maybe both." Cole came into the office on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and on those days Vanessa's assistant had learned, without being told directly, to schedule her afternoon blocks with enough flexibility that the last hour of the day could expand if a conversation was running long. It had become a pattern by January, Cole finishing his work on the oversight protocols, Vanessa finishing whatever the afternoon had required of her, and the two of them ending up in the 48th floor conference room, which had been refurnished after the morning's events with different chairs and a new table, talking about whatever needed to be talked about. It wasn't scheduled. Neither of them referred to it as a thing. It was just something that kept happening, in the way that some things happen between people who have been through something significant together and find, on the other side of it, that they've developed a frequency they can communicate on without a lot of translation. They talked about the oversight structure. They talked about Adrian's federal proceedings, which were moving through the system with the methodical slowness of federal proceedings. They talked about the company and its history and Raymond Sterling's particular way of making decisions, which Cole knew from one specific operational context and Vanessa knew from 30 years of being his daughter, and the two perspectives fit together in ways that surprised her. They talked about other things, too, less structured things. Cole talked about Lily, not in a performing the devoted father way, but in the ordinary way of a parent for whom a child is simply the central fact of daily life. Lily had decided she wanted to learn chess, which was going well. Lily had a best friend named Priya, who came over most Saturdays, and the two of them had recently discovered that the backyard's fence had a loose board, which was not going well. Lily had asked Cole, at breakfast 2 weeks ago, whether he liked his job, and when he'd said he thought so, she'd said, "You seem less worried lately," and he'd had no immediate response to that because it was accurate and he hadn't realized it showed. "She reads you that clearly?" Vanessa asked. "She reads everything that clearly. It's alarming. It sounds useful." "It is, right up until she does it to you instead of someone else." Vanessa smiled. She did that more in these conversations than she did in most. Not because they were easy. They weren't, particularly. Cole was not someone who smoothed things over, but because there was something about a person who said exactly what he meant without managing your reaction to it that made the moments of lightness feel genuine rather than performed. She told him about Dr. Seo. She didn't make a presentation of it, just mentioned it in the context of something they were discussing, and he received it the way he received most things, without making it larger than she'd offered it. "Is it helping?" he asked. "Slowly," she said. "Yes." "Good." That was it. That was the whole exchange, and it was enough, and she was beginning to understand that his economy with words was not remoteness but its opposite, a form of presence that didn't need to fill space to be real. The formal sentencing in Adrian Mercer's case came in March. She didn't attend. She had the right to submit a victim impact statement, and she wrote one, which took her 4 drafts over 2 weeks, and which she rewrote twice more before she sent it to the prosecutor's office. The final version was not what the first version had been. The first version was angrier than she'd realized while she was writing it, and she wasn't interested in performing her anger for a courtroom. The final version said what was true: that trust had been built and systematically exploited, that the damage to the company was measurable and was being addressed, and that the damage to her personally was harder to quantify and was also being addressed. Adrian received 9 years. Corporate espionage, biometric identity fraud, conspiracy, and wire fraud, with additional federal charges related to the illegal disposition of classified defense contracts. His legal team had argued, with some effectiveness, for reduction based on his cooperation. The prosecution had argued, with more effectiveness, for the severity of the planning involved, not a moment of compromised judgment, but a constructed operation running across multiple years. The judge had split the difference in the way that judges sometimes do. 9 years. Vanessa got the call from outside counsel at 11 in the morning and sat with it for a few minutes before her next meeting. She thought about a lot of things in those few minutes. She thought about the first time Adrian had walked her through a board presentation when she was 28, and so new to the chair that her hands had been slightly unsteady during the Q&A. She thought about the night Raymond was first hospitalized, and Adrian had stayed at the office until 3 in the morning, helping her prepare communications for the company's partners. She thought about the instruction document with the word escalate in it, and the 20 contractors, and Cole's face on a financial news feed next to a photograph she still didn't know the provenance of. She thought about the fact that the man who had done all of those things was the same man, and that this was the thing she'd had the most trouble holding in her mind. Not the betrayal itself, but the continuity of the person who had committed it. That Adrian Mercer had been capable of genuine loyalty and manufactured loyalty simultaneously for years, and that she couldn't cleanly separate one from the other, and that she probably never would be able to. She told Dr. Co about this at her next appointment. "You want a version where he was always the villain," Dr. Co said. "It would be simpler." "Yes. But it's not what you actually experienced." "No. So what do you do with someone who was real to you and also did this?" She thought about it for a while. "You hold both things," she said. "I think. You don't let the betrayal erase what was real, and you don't let what was real excuse the betrayal. You just hold both things, even when they don't fit together." Dr. Co nodded. "That's harder than either alternative," she said. "Yes," Vanessa agreed. "It is." The day Cole finished the Oversight Division's operational manual, a 112-page document that he had written and revised over 4 months, and that Webb had reviewed 3 times, and that Vanessa had read in its entirety over a weekend in late March. He brought a printed copy into the office and set it on the conference room table with the unceremonious quality of someone completing a task rather than presenting an achievement. "That's it," he said. Vanessa picked it up. She'd read the digital version, but there was something about the physical weight of it. She flipped to a page in the middle section, the authorization escalation protocols, and read a paragraph she remembered reading on her laptop. It was clear and specific and written in the plain language of someone who has no interest in making systems more complicated than they need to be. She'd noticed, reading the whole document, that there was something of Cole in the writing itself. The same economy, the same refusal to perform comprehensiveness at the expense of usefulness. "You wrote this well," she said. "I wrote it so the people using it wouldn't need to call me to interpret it." "That's the same thing." He didn't argue with that. She set it back on the table. "So the division is operational. As of Monday, Webb has the staffing in place, the monitoring systems are running, the external audit on the technology department finishes next week, and the preliminary findings are clean." He paused. "You don't need me in the building twice a week anymore." She looked at him. "I know," she said. A silence that wasn't uncomfortable but had a particular quality to it, the kind that exists when something is in the process of being said and both people are deciding how. "The consulting engagement was always going to be finite," he said. "That was what we agreed." It was. "Lily's spring break is next week. I promised her a trip to the aquarium and 3 days of nothing in particular." Something in his expression shifted into the specific softness that appeared there when he talked about his daughter. Not sentimentality, but something more honest than that. "She's been patient about the Tuesdays and Thursdays." "She sounds like she's been patient about a lot of things," Vanessa said. "She has." He was quiet for a moment. "She asked about you, actually, a few weeks ago." Vanessa looked at him. "What did she ask?" "She asked if the lady whose dad knew me was nice." He paused. "She'd seen your name on some papers I had at home." "What did you tell her?" "I told her you were serious but fair." He said it with the slight inflection of someone reporting a fact while being aware it might not be the most flattering framing. Vanessa considered this. "That's accurate." "She said it sounded like you'd be good at chess." Vanessa laughed. It came out more genuine than she'd expected, the kind of laugh that arrives before you decide to have it. "Why chess?" "She thinks serious and fair are chess qualities. She's 8. She's working with a limited reference set." "Tell her I've been meaning to learn," Vanessa said. "Have you?" "No, but I'm open to it." He looked at her for a moment with the specific quality of attention he had, the one that didn't perform itself. "The consulting engagement ends," he said. "That doesn't mean the conversation does." She understood what he was saying and what he wasn't saying, and the distinction mattered. He wasn't offering her something fully formed. He was being honest about what he knew and what he didn't, which was, she had come to understand, how Cole Harrington operated in every context that mattered to him. No more certainty than he actually had, and no less honesty than the situation required. "I know," she said. "I live 45 minutes from here." "I know that too. I have a daughter who spreads jam like she's painting a wall and asks strangers if they play chess." "I know." He almost smiled. "I'm not easy." Cole, she said, I run an $11 billion company. I managed a federal conspiracy investigation from the 61st floor while simultaneously coordinating a media rollout and briefing a board of directors. I think I can handle 45 minutes on the highway. He was quiet for a second. All right, he said. Man. The company's first fully restructured board meeting was held in April. New chairs, 3 of them, replacing members whose passive proximity to the Crestfield process had made their positions untenable. New agenda, new authorization protocols built into every agenda item above a certain financial threshold, requiring dual-channel verification that ran through both the CFO's office and the Independent Oversight Division simultaneously. The protocols were Cole's design. The implementation had been Webb's work. The result was a system that was more cumbersome than what it replaced, and considerably more resistant to the kind of exploitation Adrian had managed. Eleanor Fitch, who had remained on the board through everything, and who had the particular resilience of someone who has survived enough institutional upheaval to stop being surprised by it, had reviewed the new protocols with the careful attention she gave to everything, and had said only, "It's heavier, but it's honest," which was, Vanessa had told Cole, the best possible review from Eleanor Fitch. The meeting itself ran 3 hours, longer than ideal, but the new members needed the context and the existing members needed the reassurance of process, and both were legitimate requirements. Vanessa ran it with the focused precision she brought to things she'd prepared for carefully. At the end of it, the board voted on 2 resolutions: the formal restructuring of the corporate security function and the annual authorization of the Oversight Division's operating mandate, and both passed unanimously. When the meeting concluded and the directors filed out, Eleanor Fitch stopped beside Vanessa at the head of the table. "Your father would have run that meeting differently," she said. "I know," Vanessa said. "Better in some ways, worse in others." Eleanor gathered her papers. "You're not him. That's not a criticism." "I know that too." Eleanor looked at her for a moment. "You've changed since October." "A lot has happened since October." "Yes, but that's not what I mean." The older woman picked up her bag. "Raymond used to worry that you were too much in your head, too reliant on the people you trusted to tell you what was in the room." She paused at the door. "You seem more in the room yourself now." She left. Vanessa stood at the head of the table in the empty boardroom and sat with that for a while. It was both the kindest and most painful thing anyone had said to her in months, because it was true, and because the thing that had put her more in the room was the experience of discovering how wrong she'd been about it. You don't learn to trust your own perception by getting everything right. You learn it by getting something badly wrong and surviving the getting it wrong, and choosing, on the other side of it, to stay engaged rather than retreat into the safety of people who will simply confirm what you already think. That was what Adrian had been, in the end. Not just a betrayal, but a mirror of her own avoidance. Someone who had understood, with the precision of a person who studies vulnerabilities for a living, exactly how to position himself as the thing she was using to not have to see clearly herself. She was seeing more clearly now. It cost something. It continued to cost something. That was true, and it was going to keep being true, and she was learning slowly that the cost was worth paying. Cole was in the lobby when she came downstairs. He was not waiting. He had a meeting with Webb that had apparently ended early, and he was standing near the building's main entrance reading something on his phone with the self-contained quality of a man who is entirely comfortable doing nothing in a public space. He looked up when she approached. "How was it?" he said. "Good." She thought about it. "Really good, actually." Eleanor Fitch, terrifying as always, said something unexpectedly kind. He pocketed his phone. "I'm heading out. Early day. Lily has a chess thing at school tonight. She's been practicing her opening moves on me for 2 weeks, and I've been letting her win in a way she's starting to suspect." "You're letting her win?" "She's 8. She's going to figure it out." "She already has. She told me last Thursday that I was playing bad on purpose and it was insulting." He said it with the expression of a parent who is genuinely impressed even while being called out. "So now I have to actually play." "How good are you at chess?" "Better than an 8-year-old, he said. "Barely. Vanessa walked with him toward the building's main entrance. Through the glass doors, Chicago in April was doing its variable best, sun and then not, the kind of day that can't decide what season it is. "The aquarium," she said. "Did she like it?" She spent 45 minutes in front of the jellyfish tank. Didn't want to leave. He paused. She asked if jellyfish have feelings. I didn't know the answer. "Nobody really does," Vanessa said. "There's debate." I told her something like that. She found it unsatisfying. She sounds like she doesn't accept easy answers. Never has. Not since she was 4. He said it with the mix of pride and exasperation that parents have about the qualities in their children that come directly from themselves. They reached the entrance. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary afternoon. A cab pulled up and let someone out. A delivery person came through the revolving door with a cart. Ordinary things happening in the ordinary way that the world does not suspend itself for whatever significance exists inside any particular building on any particular day. Cole looked at her. "Saturday," he said. "If you want to learn the opening moves before Lily gets a hold of you." It was not a grand gesture. It was not carefully worded. It was a former Navy SEAL who drove 45 minutes from the suburbs twice a week and whose daughter spread jam like she was painting a wall, offering something small and specific and honest. Vanessa Sterling, who had spent 30 years learning to run a company and 4 months learning to see the room she was actually in, said, "Saturday works." He nodded once, the way he confirmed things he'd already known were going to happen. He pushed through the glass doors and walked out into the April afternoon, and Vanessa watched him for a moment through the lobby windows. A 45-minute drive back to Naperville, a daughter who was practicing her openings for a school chess tournament, an evening that had nothing to do with classified credentials or corporate espionage or the weight of anyone's legacy. Just a man going home. She thought about her father, not the way she'd thought about him through most of the winter, with the complicated grief of someone sorting through what she'd inherited and what had been kept from her and what had simply been the ordinary imperfection of a parent who loved her and was fallible and had done his best with what he had. She thought about him the way she'd thought about him when she was young, before the company was her responsibility. The way he looked when he sat down for dinner and put his work away and was just her father, present in the room in the simple and irreplaceable way of someone who is there. He'd been right about Cole. He'd been right in the way he was sometimes right about people. Not because he was infallible, but because he paid attention in ways that other people didn't, and because he understood that the measure of a person isn't what they do when things are easy. She'd learned that. Late, the hard way, through a morning that had taken everything she thought she understood about her own judgment and dismantled it piece by piece until only the accurate parts remained. She'd learned it. There was, she thought, walking back toward the elevator, something to be said for earning the things you know. Not everything. Not most things. The cost of earning them the way she'd earned this was too high to recommend as a general method, but there was something in the knowledge she carried now, about trust, about attention, about the specific and irreplaceable quality of a person who tells you what's true when it would be easier to tell you what you want to hear, that felt like something she would keep, something that had weight because it had been paid for. The elevator opened. She stepped in. Saturday. She thought she might bring something, coffee or food, an 8-year-old's preferred breakfast item if Cole gave her any intelligence on the matter. She thought about a child in a Naperville kitchen, 8.5 years old by her own specific count, spreading jam with the enthusiasm of someone who hasn't yet learned to do anything halfway, looking up at her father with the clear-eyed assessment of someone who reads the room better than most adults. Vanessa Sterling pushed the button for the 31st floor and stood in the rising elevator, and for the first time in a very long while felt, underneath the work and the weight and the ongoing process of rebuilding everything that needed rebuilding, something that was not quite simple and not quite easy, but was, she thought, real. That was enough. For now, that was more than enough.